Hello, everyone, and happy Black History Month. We are so excited that you are joining us for this exciting conversation on Black leaders in education. My name is Shawon Jackson, and I am the moderator for today's conversation. My pronouns are he, him, and I'm based in Oakland, California. I have the pleasure of leading a nonprofit called Vocal Justice that positions youth who are proximate to injustice as leaders for social change. And I'm so excited to be joined by other folks of the Camelback fam. I joined the community back in 2021 and I'm excited to be joined with Kimberly, Tiffany, Larry, and Jacob today. We're going to kick off our conversation, which is so important as we hear from Black leaders in the education space, with some introductions. And then after that, we will get into some prepared questions that we have. To get us started with our introductions, Kimberly, let's have you start.
Hey, how you doing, Shawon? It is great to be here. I am Kimberly, and I am in St. Louis, Missouri. I happen to be fortunate to be the founder and executive director of a K-2 charter school called the Leadership School. And this is our first year in operation. And so we have 84 amazing young people in our school that are really showing us and showing our community what it means for kids to be in the driver's seat of their own education. So I'm grateful to be in this conversation today.
Huge congratulations to you on your first year. That's so exciting.
Thank you.
Tiffany, we'll go to you next.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. Excited to be here. I joined Camelback in 2022, and I serve as the founder and CEO of Uprooted Academy. Our sole purpose is to ensure that students are both courageous and competitive in the college application process. We want to make sure that students not only apply to college, but have the holistic social emotional support to guide them through those difficult emotions. And we know that many students have their first mental breakdown in applying to college. So how can we make sure that they can holistically guide themselves through that, while also especially thinking about Black students and students who are first gen, how can they be competitive, right? Our students are working really hard, but oftentimes really wrong in the college application process, as there's a lot of secrets. And so we want to make sure that we can kind of leak that cheat code to make sure that all students have an opportunity to gain admission at places that they deserve to be at. So happy to be here and excited to meet you all.
Courageous and competitive. That is so beautiful. Larry, we'll go to you next.
Yeah, thanks, Shawon. Larry Irvin, CEO, founder of Brothers in Power to Teach, based in New Orleans. I'm a 2016 Camelback Fellow and remain a part of this community since then. Our mission and premise is we provide Black men to the education space in regards to training them as educators through a 3-year fellowship, undergraduate fellowship. And we provide a support system, help them with the praxis, sort of wraparound service, if you will, in regards to getting our young men trained, supported, and placed in the classroom and K-12 spaces from in front of the classroom as intellectual leaders. And that's what we're doing. I'm really proud of this work. We have an uptick right now, a lot of success. We have a lot of momentum, and I'm really excited what 2023 has to bring. Thanks for having me.
Well, thank you for being here, Larry, and doing that important work. Reminds me of one of my biggest mentors from my childhood, a Black man who was my sixth grade teacher. So excited to learn more about your work, and we'll close it out with Jacob for introductions.
Awesome. Thanks for having me here. So Jacob Allen, he, him, CEO and co-founder of the Pilot Ed Foundation, based here in Indianapolis with schools in Indianapolis and Las Vegas. And we're a national charter organization that focuses our schools on identity-centered work. It's what's learned about. It's how teachers are recruited and trained. It's the way we engage our community, making sure that the voices and lived experiences of those that our schools impact most are front and center in everything that we do. Thanks again for having us.
And I had to give a special shout out to Jacob, who has been a personal mentor to me as I've been building vocal justice, and excited to be in the conversation with you today. All right, so let's get into it. We got a lot of questions to get through, a lot of insights that are going to be coming up, and want to first start by having a conversation with you all about why are Black leaders so important for the overall health of the educational ecosystem. And Kimberly, I'll hand it off to you again to start.
So this is a really important question. And as someone who's been in education now for 20 years and a Black leader in this space, I think that our perspective more than anything is needed. And so I think when you have educators, Black educators leading, and to Larry's point, being intellectual leaders in the space, understanding and knowing the brilliance of Black children and what they're capable to accomplish, you just get further, right? And so I think about a couple of things in regards to that perspective. It is understanding the voice of our young people. And so being able to not only be a representation of that voice and the needs of the community, but knowing how important it is to amplify those voices of our students and their parents. And so in a way that is less about what we think the community needs, what we think our students need, what we think our parents desire, but understanding that that there is a myriad of experiences that our Black students have, and that we will amplify their voices and give space for that voice. And then I think the last piece that sort of goes without saying is the connection, right? And so the understanding, like, just there's sometimes an unspoken connection that you can have as a Black leader with students who look like you, with parents, with other teachers and administrators, that just allows you to get further along in a conversation and to really focus in on the needs of young people. And so I think that if we are a community where we're primarily serving, which I am, Black children, that it is important that there is a Black leader at the helm of the organization that is bringing that voice, that connection, that perspective.
A lot for us to chew on at the start there, Kimberly. Thank you. Tiffany, I see you came off and you go ahead.
Yeah, I just oftentimes think about the work that I'm doing, right, in college access and mental health. We have like a pretty nice intersection of that. And I think about the organizations that serve in those ways that make the most money. They're making it leveraging our students who know that they need it the most, but yet are oftentimes giving them the full formula of what our kids need. And so like you start to like have these organizations like dangle these carrots, like we're giving them information around this process, but really they're not. And it's so intentional, right? Because our students are not lacking in brilliance, right? They're just lacking in opportunity. They're lacking in social capital. And so for me, it was huge to be a Black person, a Black woman in this space, because oftentimes individuals, even when I ran a college team, oftentimes individuals who serve our students have no idea of their inherent needs. And so every single time I'm in front of a Black leader and we're talking about Uprooted Academy and what the components are, they're like, how do you know this? I'm like, because I'm the kid that I'm serving, right? Like I needed these things as a kid. And, to kind of piggyback off of what Kimberly was talking about, I grew up in Connecticut. And so I grew up in a Black town, right, in New Haven, but socioeconomically, like we were pretty flatlined, right? Everyone basically had free or reduced lunch. But then I went to Howard for grad school. And I oftentimes think if I was cultivated in a community with that style of intellectualism as a Black person, I don't even know where I was. I was always curious. I was always inquisitive. I was always a smart kid, but I always thought there was a cap to it, right? Like to the point where even after I got my undergrad degree, I was like, okay, let me just get a union job. But when I went to Howard and every single person that looked like me was doing something big, I wouldn't be here today and taking these risks of starting these organizations without that model, right? Even if they never said anything to me, the model alone was all I needed to believe that I could do it. And so when we're thinking about Black leaders in education, it's generational, right? Like it is literally changing the narrative, and it's expanding my like psychological like thoughts on what is possible. And so I just wanted to kind of chime in there. I know like Larry's probably gonna mention something as well, but I couldn't not say that because, you know, we really have to be in this space because the folks that are providing support and curriculum for our students aren't even our students. And that's problematic because we have the answers more than anybody else for the things our kids need.
Wow. Thank y'all both for sharing those responses. The through line that I wanted to bring up now is this piece around understanding, right? Like Tiffany, you stated it so eloquently when you talked about you are the student that you're trying to support today, right? And that intimate understanding of our community because we're a part of that community is such a powerful case for why we need to be in this space. And then I'm also thinking about this through line of connection that you all were both getting at, both in terms of your understanding of the community and also how you can just relate to folks, you know, like if you have family members, neighbors, friends in the community, you know how to communicate with folks and have a better understanding of what's important to folks or what they might be interested in and how that can help to do this work better. So thank y'all for sharing all of those insights. Jacob, Larry, did y'all have any other thoughts you wanted to share on that piece before I move us to our next question?
Of course.
Go for it, Larry. Go for it.
Definitely, man. But I agree with everything Kimberly and Tiffany had to say. Everything they alluded to. Obviously, representation matters. So, you know, our Black and brown students, and I'm gonna speak from the Black lens today because I think the conversation gets a little muddied sometimes when we try to sort of like drop all in one, if you will. So I'm gonna speak from a Black lens and just, you know, representation definitely matters, particularly from the work and the lens that I do. You know, less than 3% of all teachers are Black men. So a lot of times our Black boys and Black girls don't get a chance to see, what it looks like for a male to stand in front of the classroom and lead from an intellectual capacity. We see us as janitors, as athletic coaches, intervention specialists, disciplinarians, things of that nature, but we don't really get a chance to see us lead intellectually from in front of the classroom. And that dynamic, when it's in place, we've seen magic happens when that's in place. But I think we got to dig a little bit deeper, Shawon, in regards to just assuming, right? There's this, there's an assumed allyship because somebody has the same skin tone as me. And it's just not true. And I think we a lot of times find ourselves in traps or on a hamster wheel, just thinking that, because we share the same skin, that we share the same perspectives, we share the same ideologies. I've seen, if I can be frank, through my own personal experience, I just know that not to be true. As a Black heterosexual man walking in this space who stands firm, right, in that, I've experienced a lot of adversities and from a professional standpoint, right, and I've needed a lot of help, and I've assumed a lot of times that me reaching out to certain folks, certain leaders in education, certain pockets, certain buckets of diverse groups and who push and advocate for Blackness and folks of color in education. Assuming that I'm going to get resources and going to get help, and it's just not the case. Just like any other space or any other arena, there's cliques. All Black folks, we're not a monolith. So, and when I think about just my archetype of leadership, right, I've been deemed the authentic leader because of my story and how colorful it is, and my untraditional trajectory to education. All Black folks haven't accepted that. All that my leadership style isn't digestible. It leaves a distaste. And some Black folks. Miles, depending on how they view the work. I have a very untraditional story, even though I've had the impact and things of that nature. But there's certain spaces that I walk into and certain offices that I walk into where the Blackness that sits across from me, there isn't a congruency, if you will. There's a disconnect in regards to what my experience is, what I think, how I show up as a leader, and what that person thinks I should, the archetype or what the aesthetic should be in regards to the work that I do. And I think, if we were all to close our eyes and really thinking about the work of teacher development, right, and teacher training, and we're talking about pedagogy and things of that nature, I don't think folks would open their eyes and see Larry per se in regards to my story. I'm a 6'4", almost 300-pound Black man. I'm Southern. I'm loud. Big lips, big head, and I carry that everywhere I go. And it's just not fully embraced by all the blacks. There's a group of blacks who, if you want to call them ed reformers and things of that nature, who just who don't feel it's their responsibility just because we share the same skin tone that they're supposed to help me or they're going to advocate for my style of leadership, man. And that's actually where I get the high risk CEO moniker from. It came from black folks. It came from black folks that I walked into their office, I walked to their spaces. We all know we have to start questioning some of our leadership. And I don't think being black is just the sole criteria when it comes to being a black leader. We have to start really digging down to the folks and saying, what is their paper trail? What is their pedigree? What is their sweat equity into the work? What is their indoctrination into the work? Because a lot of times we just assume that folks have a skin tone, that there's a cultural connection, that there's a connection in regards to our children, and that they're really ready to advocate and really roll their sleeves up in regards to black work. And it's just not the case, man. And I hate to be the bearer of bad news. I think we all know this to be true. A lot of times we don't want to say it, but we just got to do a little bit more work. We got to do a little bit more work in regards to what is people alignment to black folks? What is their, not necessarily just their race, but what's their ethnicity in regards to their experience? Just because you're black doesn't mean you necessarily have a black experience. Just because you're black doesn't necessarily mean you're going to advocate for the black experience. A lot of people are chasing titles, chasing money, things of that nature. We got to start really doing the hard work and drilling down, man, and seeing what folks what's the true investment in regards to the equity and sweat equity that they're going to put into our kids, man. And that's my answer. I'm gonna leave that there so we can keep pushing.
You just ended us with some deep insight there, and I appreciate that push to say, yes, this is an important criteria, but it's insufficient to just rely on that, right? And digging deeper is important.
Absolutely.
Shifting gears a little bit, I want to talk about some of the challenges that we come from being in this space, right? And Jacob, we'll love to hear from you first. What are some of the big challenges you're seeing in your community about the challenges that Black leaders are facing and Black educators, and what do you think we might do to address some of them?
I'm a big fan of stand-up comedy, and they always say it's hard to follow a good act. And so, I had to hear Larry, and now I got to give my answer. I'm just kidding. It's always good to hear truth in this family we have here. I would say, when I think about the two issues facing Black educators, I think we always hear the word representation, and I think it's a lot of times faced for student population. So what does it mean to have Black educators in front of students? But what I've actually learned quite a bit is that, we need Black adults in front of Black adults as well. And one of the big things I've noticed is that you'll see things maybe in some districts, whether it's Baltimore or Los Angeles Unified, you might see yourself represented as a Black educator in your staff, in your student population, your neighborhood, your curriculum, but when we think about rural populations, when we think about Midwestern populations, Southern communities, sometimes that's just not the case. And I think as adults, we're human too. We started out in kindergarten, but here we are today as adults, is that we still are affected by the lack of representation of seeing people who don't look like us lead our schools, lead our communities, lead our students, and saying, well, I'm happy that I'm one of 3 Black educators at a school of 85 teachers. And so I think as I started getting deeper outside of some of those main cities, like again, your Baltimore, LA, New York, Chicago, I started seeing things that were a little more uncomfortable for the adults in the building. And then the second thing I'll say, one of the biggest is, and this is definitely something that was, I think, happening for decades before the pandemic, and it's only been exacerbated by the pandemic, is that competition with other industries. To be honest with you, teachers are too undervalued, they're too under-equipped, they are too underpaid to compete with some of these other industries that are just now getting quote unquote woke to Black genius. And so I think they are saying, oh, well, now we have a DEI team and now we really want, Black educators because that brings a different lens into our corporate space or into our manufacturing space. And to be honest with you, those are the same individuals coming out of college that are saying, hey, we might want to go to the local district or the local school. And so I would say those two things, really representation for adults and then also competition with other industries who've really been sleeping on Black genius for hundreds of years, but now all of a sudden want everybody on this call. So I'll leave it there with those two things.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Tiffany, go ahead.
Yeah, I just my background, I'm actually a licensed therapist, so I do trauma work, and then I ended up working in college access, and so those two combined complete who I am as a person. So I'll always show up and kind of answer from a lens of that way. When I think about my own role of like working in a school, right, of students who look like me, oftentimes what happens is when you are a Black educator, especially being around other Black students, it's really hard to separate your own trauma from what you're seeing, because these kids are literally mirroring back to you, and we don't have a lot of tools in our repertoire in order to like manage our trauma. We're not going to therapy, and even therapists up until recently, when you think about like EMDR and other trauma modalities, we particularly as a field, we weren't equipped in handling trauma. We only thought trauma was for folks who were veterans or in car accidents, and what we're really finding out is our nervous system is impacted in so many more ways. And so knowing that our nervous system is impacted through sensory components, it can be like something like a shortcut, like someone that looks like us. So when our students are telling us about their things that they're dealing with, it unleashes our own trauma. And unfortunately, once we no longer feel safe, which is necessary to support students, to be able to connect them to resources and not think about yourself, when we move into survival, we actually are not our best self for our students. And so Black educators have that layer. The other layer that I think that we have as educators in the Black space of working with Black students and being a Black educator is that we are charged to instill hope in our students, even when our own lives might lack it in many different ways, right? So when we're looking at our own peers, when we're looking at our own families, for me, I was first in my family to go to college. So, I have been able to do things that I know that I have the ability to handle, whether it means going to the doctor because I'm sick, right? Other members of my family cannot do that, right? And so here I am trying to instill all of this hope for my students, but yet also needing to be the hope instiller for my family and my local community. And that's draining, right? And it gets tiring. And then the last thing that I thought of is this idea of, historically as a people, right? When we're thinking about change and Black folks, oftentimes our number one driver is impact, right? We want to make change. We want to have impact. We want to do all of this stuff at the expense of our own joy, at the expense of our own rest. And so because of that, oftentimes we get burnt out. So things doesn't have longevity. It's like we did amazing work for 5 years, but then we had to leave because we didn't pay ourselves, right? We weren't getting the rest. Now our bodies are sick and we need therapists, but we don't have health insurance, right? So we're not being driven by things that are more productive, like joy, or things that are more productive, like self-care, knowing that if we just fuel with that, at the end of the day, every single person on the screen, because we are Black, we make impact just based off of our DNA. Like we can show up places and change the entire scenario of it just by our own being. But we were taught that we should always drive impact at the expense of everything else in our lives, our family, our personal families, our health. And so because of that, I think it just creates an extra layer of challenges for Black educators, especially when they're working with Black students. And then for those who choose not to work with Black students, they're dealing with something else called guilt sometimes, right? Like, should I have left that community, right? And so again, I'm always going to answer from that social emotional perspective because that's just how my brain thinks. But those are the things that are underlying the challenges that I think also go on top of what was already spoken around the workload, the pay, and everything else.
Yes, you and Jacob were sharing. I was really thinking about this idea of you can't do good for others if you're not feeling good for yourself. And we as adults also need representation. We also need support to navigate our own traumas, what's going on outside of the school setting. And so I'm glad, Tiffany, you brought that social emotional lens, right? Because it's so important to how we're showing up in this work. Shifting gears to our next question now. I want to talk about innovation and technology that we've been seeing in the education landscape. And Tiffany, I understand that your organization has some technology work that you're doing, and I'm curious, as the head of an ed tech company, what are some of the technological disruptions you're seeing in the space?
Yeah, so for us at Uprooted, we are unapologetic in this idea of being able to democratize the college application process, right? When we think about the way that college support has been done and how it's been working for the last 50 to 75 years, right? Oftentimes what has been sold to us is that it's your school counselor, right? And so all across the country, we all believe that our school counselor is just as overworked as folks in suburban community school counselors, and that everybody only has, on average, 36 minutes with their school counselor. That's a number that's known in research, is that every kid normally only spends around 36 minutes with a school counselor related to college going supports. So when you are going to college, when I was applying to college, I assumed that the playing field was level. Everybody had 1 or 2 meetings over 4 years, and that we were all doing the best that we could, right? We went to our English teacher for our college essay, and that is how we got in. And then all of a sudden you take a step back and you realize that was a lie, right? Because like in these wealthy communities, what they have is they have these college application boot camps that families pay $1,500 for, right? And then on top of that, they have SAT and ACT prep, right? And then on top of that, right, they have their community that's filled with college graduates, folks who are on trustee boards, folks who know somebody who knows somebody, right? And then on top of that, they still feel the need to pay $20,000 for an individual counselor. And yet you have a little girl like Tiffany who is actually really smart, but just under-resourced, right? And so at the evaluation table, right, I was an application reader. At the evaluation table, it doesn't matter what my journey was to put that application in. We're all now being scored on the same component. And that does not feel good, right? That's like not justice, not equity, right? It just doesn't make sense. And so when we look at all of those supports, right, there's all of these like, financial hurdles, right? There's time hurdles, right? The college application bootcamp world is like, hey, spend 7 days with us for 5 hours a day. And it's like, no, Tiffany has to work at the mall, right? Like I can't do that, right? Or I have childcare duties, or I need to help out at home with the family, right? And then there's, distance, right? They're not offered in urban areas for the most part. So now how am I going to get to Greenwich, Connecticut to be able to get these supports? The kicker is I didn't even know they existed, right? There's so many school counselors that we talk about Uprooted Academy with. When I say like, oh, this is our why, and we show them like 2 kids and their trajectory, they're like, what is an independent counselor? I'm like, oh, right. Like, and here we are doing the best that we could. And if our kids knew more, they would do more. They just don't even know that there's more to do. And so what we do to be able to democratize that process, we say, hey, we're going to take away the privilege of time, space, and finances. Your kids can have this app. There's all of the information that I've learned both in this like work as like a high school as well as an application reader. And all of it is on demand for them, right? And because it's on demand, what that means is there's multiple entry points. And there's the ability to replay, because the problem with college going resources, and I'm talking about all of the big names that you can think of that you go to, right? It's all assumption based. It's all surface level. It believes that like somebody else is going to fill in the gaps, or it believes that someone else can explain these concepts that, kids have no idea what you're talking about, right? So again, it goes back to what I said before. It's like this little carrot. It's like, oh, no, we did everything that we could for them. It's like, no, you didn't. Your kids don't even use this resource because it's not enough. But yet you want to assume and you want to put these ads in these places with urban kids who have these hopes and these dreams, only to know that they're not able to be actualized because they don't actually have what it takes. Right? Not because they don't have the grades and they don't have the ambition. They don't even have the understanding that there's a gap in what they have and what somebody else is getting. And so our ability to have technology in this space changed the game, right? And no longer said these like live workshops where you're asking parents to show up is something that like is the only option. And it gives kids an opportunity to chime in, to replay, because all of this is new, right? And so how could we create that space with social emotional supports in there? There's like mindfulness, there's breath work in there. Hey, when your body feels overwhelmed, it's because it's confusing discomfort. This is hard with danger. You're not in danger. I know you're used to danger, but this is not dangerous. This is just discomfort. And we can do academic risk taking. Right. So when we think about our kids, they're risky. They jumping off of, different things. They're brave, they're courageous, but not in the academic space because we haven't facilitated that. And so that holistic process for us means that like I'm getting text messages right before Christmas. Like our kids got into like ED Columbia, right? Our kids got into ED at Tufts, right? All of these spaces that was just a thought, a dream with no actual resources to do it. Our kids are able to do it. Is it the best fit, right? Like we would love a human, right? But because we can't, we're going to do what we can, right? Because that's how we always have to get down as folks, right? Like we might not be able to give you everything that we think you should get, but listen, we're going to pull together everything that we can. And so for us, it was a game changer. I think for school district, it had never been done before. And that was intentional, because you mean to tell me that this girl who was working at a school could fund this project and you multimillionaires can't? No, they didn't want to. Right? They wanted that gap to be there. And so for us, it just means that like more kids are going to actualize their dreams. They're going to be in better positions to be able to be rubbing elbows with like wealthy people's dads who can fund their apps, right? Like for me, I have to like hope for something like Camelback to save me. But like, had I been in the right place at the right time, right? Like, it's just like, thank God for Camelback, because woo, you look at these people, like, I'm gonna call it out, like the girl who came up with Theranos. Someone gave her like tons of money just for an idea. She never even had a product. She raised almost $1 billion, right? We don't get that privilege. And so for me to be able to make sure that kids are in the right place at the right time means that in 20 years, they're going to be in the right place at the right time. And so that's what it does for me in this space, and why I'm like super thankful for the ability to bring tech into the college access space.
I love it. I'm hearing this big theme around accessibility, right? It's like, yes, ideally we would have people who are there working with students, and in absence of that, how can we use technology to make it more accessible? And really like that piece you said about using technology to have the learning experience work in alignment with where you are. If you need to pause the video, if you need to rewind, if you need to play it again, those are all some really excellent points. And Kimberly, I'm curious to hear your perspective as somebody who's at a school, right? As you hear about technologies like the one Tiffany is offering or other ed tech solutions, what gets you excited about some technological innovations? And then what also starts to give you pause where you say, I don't know if I want to bring this into my community?
Yeah, so I couldn't wait to jump into this conversation, Tiffany. I absolutely love what you're doing, and so much of what Tiffany talked about resonated with me, just in terms of like access, right? And like what our kids, the gaps that are intentional and what have been allowed to kind of be there over time. And so our school is an elementary school. So we started this year with kindergarten, first and second grade. And so we've got the youngest of people. It's a while before they're thinking about college, but this piece around like what technology can do to put kids in the driver's seat really resonates and connects with our motto at the Leadership School. And I think that what we're trying to do is really ensure that our young people will down the road have all of the choice and opportunities that are available to them. And what I know from my own experience is that we have to prepare them so that when those opportunities are in front of them, they know how to create their own path. And so, for us, technology in K-1-2 looks very different because yes, we definitely use all different kinds of learning platforms and opportunities to do personalized learning for our students where they can work at their own pace. They can, kind of set their own goals and things like that. But I think more than anything, it is like we have to make sure that our kids are reading, writing, thinking at high levels. And so we opened our school in a community where it's a district where I used to work, and in a community where for decades, right? So we're talking about generations of students being of the lowest performing in the state of Missouri. And so our school opened in a district where there's 3% of kids proficient in math and 7% of kids proficient in reading, right? So that's unacceptable. And to Tiffany's point, we know this to be true, that like we've had state takeover, we've had like all kinds of different things happen in this community, and there's not been any growth academically, right? And so you think about, why is that happening? Why is it allowed to continue to happen? And there's so much innovation and so much know-how in the world of education, and it's not happening here. And so the way we thought about it with the parents and in the community where we serve is that people want their kids to be able to make their own decisions, to have an opportunity to think about who they are as individuals. And that's what we do at the Leadership School. We really focus on how each individual student is different, how their needs are different, what they're coming to the table, their interests, their opportunities to learn. And so we have our core curriculum. Yes, like we're going to teach kids to read, to write, to think, to do math, and all of those things. But more than that, what we're doing is building that belief in themselves. So we have a mantra at our school that we do hard things, right? And so, we just ground in that. And when you hear kindergartners talking about the power of yet, when they're talking about how they can't do something yet, but these are the steps they're working towards it, I think for me, like that feels groundbreaking in a way that's not an app. It's not a platform or a computer-based program, but what it is an opportunity to build a community of young people who support one another, who have kind of gone back, for lack of a better words, to our roots, right? Like we think about I don't know. I think a lot about like access and opportunity, and as opportunity for Black folks in this country expanded over the years, like we move further and further away from the collective to the individual. And so what we're trying to do also is help our kids like understand that we teach them to be leaders in the context of community, in the context of a relationship-oriented environment where nobody's doing it alone, but we're doing it together. And so I just think like so much of what's already been said in this conversation, from Tiffany, from Larry, talking about, you know, Black folks and the role that we play in supporting Black children. I think that what gives me pause sometimes with this piece around either actual tech programs or just a different philosophy, if you think about tech in that way, is that unfortunately, like not everybody wants to see these Black kids at my school win, right? And some of those people who don't want to see them win happen to be people who look like them, right? And so again, I've been in education long enough and spent enough of my years as a teacher watching superintendents or other high-level district officials who like not do right by Black kids who look like them, who come from similar circumstances, right? And so I think what we're trying to do is intentionally like flip that thing on its head and say that like, you know, all of us matter. Every single child in this building, it has promise, has genius, has potential. And how do we cultivate that? How do we help them understand that they can do hard things, understand that they can be in the driver's seat, understand that they can set their own goals, that they can track their own progress. And we're starting that now with 5-year-olds, right? And so that by the time they're of high school age, looking at colleges or whatever they want to do in the world, they are aware of resources and opportunity and know how to go find those things. Yeah, so that's kind of what, when I think about technology, I really think about, you know, how are we making space, and then how are we removing those people, those naysayers out of the way who are not going to do the right things for our kids.
I want to just highlight something that was just said that I think is worth pausing for, which is the reality that there are multi-billion-dollar industries and companies that profit off of the failure of Black kids, right? Assessment programs, tech platforms that not only don't want to see our children win, they make a lot of money by us not winning. And I think that when you think about venture capital funding that, when you think about districts signing multi-million, multi-year deals with some of these companies, you forget that at the end of this is, yes, a stat that one day we'll go from 5% literacy to 8% literacy for Black kids in this district, but we're going to stay around because 92% of our Black kids can't read. And so I think it's really important to think about the fact that there's a profit model that also takes away Black genius.
Yeah. And I think, Jacob, I appreciate you saying that, because I think the piece that I try to think about all the time is how are we then like supporting not only our children, but their families and the broader community, those of us who have the right approach that like every kid is a reflection of ourselves and every child deserves to be reading, that we can't have, we don't even want to get to a 50% margin. Like, so how do we then like, you know, bring that community feel back and that approach that like, how do we do this together? And to the point around, you know, we can't rely on some of these bigger companies, but what is the innovation? What is the voice and the perspective of our parents? How do we bring them to the table to say, hey, here's what my child actually needs. Here's what I need to be able to support them at home. And we make those things happen. Like, their tools and resources are great, but to your point, like some of these tools and resources, you know, really, you know, they're not trying to put themselves out of business. So they're going to give you just enough, right, to see a margin of improvement so that you'll re-up the next year. And I think the way to get rid of that is to bring our own solutions to the table and bring our own people and our own bodies and within our own house, if so to speak.
Kimberly, do you think we need, and I know Shawon, I know I'm not the moderator, I shouldn't be asking questions and things of that nature, but I want, you know, as I'm listening to some of these common threads through this dialogue, do you think we need a reinvestment in human capital and in human talent? And does tech sort of pull us for, like, the deeper investment we make in tech, does it sort of indirectly pull us further and further and further away from truly connecting with our kids and with our communities?
Oh, absolutely. And here's the thing, Larry, like, I mean, we probably all on this call as Black leaders can identify our own, like, you know, how we light up and how you get excited and just like the communal sort of way that we learn and share
Right.
information and share stories and do that. And so, like, what I know more than anything, our young people, like, they need to be known, seen, and loved, right? And if that's not happening, they're not going to learn. And so you can't put an inanimate thing in front of them and that thing alone, right? Like it's got to come first through this relationship. And then I tell you how we're going to leverage this tool and this resource. But yeah, I do think that we've got to keep that personal connection for sure for our kids.
Yeah, and even as someone who has tech, right? Like this is interesting because I had a conversation with someone a couple of days ago where there was a school that approached me and said like, hey, we want to use your system. And I said, okay, like as someone who used to be in a school counseling position, I want to have a conversation with them. And you can tell quickly that for them, it was just to say that they were doing something, right?
Mm.
Let's just list the resource. And I was like, you know, our model doesn't work that way. Like, we don't believe that tech replaces, like, we actually are like hands on the ground with our partners. And we're like, hey, if you don't want to be involved, like, we're really not the solution for you, not in a paid way, right? Like, you can, you know, use we have an equity free version, like, you can use that, but like, to invest resources and believe that your kids are supposed to get them, but never give it to them in a way that makes sense, that's not the partnership we want. And I know, like someone, Jacob just mentioned, right? Like, I don't lead with a revenue model. I lead with an impact model, right? Is that the best in the terms of like the business world? No, but like, even, you know, in my journey of this work, I've had to have challenging conversations. They're just like, well, you can close a deal. I'm like, I don't care about a deal, right? Like, the deal was not why I got in this, right? If the deal was why I got in this, right, I could be doing something else without all this stress and pressure of like leading a company. I could be doing anything if I just cared about money, but actually I care about these kids more deeply because I'm trying to reinvent what could have been for my peers, right? Like the peers that when I go home, I see them and they didn't go to college or they had to drop out because they didn't pick the right financial fit, right? Like if I believe that this is the resource, then that's it. And then another thing I think that I have I don't want to say like the extra layer, right? It's not a burden, it's a beautiful layer that I have is that one of the things that I have had challenging conversations is just the pay model in general, right? Like if I believe that I have the solution and then I become the gatekeeper for the solution, that doesn't feel good, right? And so I think in general, I'm competing with like revenue model people, right? Like for them, they have a great pitch. They know they're not giving them everything, right? They're just like Jacob said, like leading with money, profit first. And because they look good, they sound good, they have all these resources. And to be honest, because educators have a lot on their plate, they don't really have time to grapple with a new solution, right? So for them, it's just easy. Like let's just like resign. And for me, it becomes so much greater than that, which is why we actually have an equity arm now. We didn't start off as like a philanthropically driven company, but then I was like, man, this doesn't feel good. Here I am pitching this thing to this school. If they can't get through their red tape, then I'm like, well, sorry, your kids don't get it. I'm like, wait, that does not feel good, right? And so again, even though I'm no longer in the schools, right, I still bring that layer of complexity to this work that I don't think that my white counterparts have to think about, right? Like they're just not thinking that deeply about their solutions. But you're right. For me, it's tech and a human, right? Like we have drop-in hours. Like it's like, hey, these kids need a hand, right? Like they need that sense of safety. So I just wanted to chime in as like even a Black individual that leads the ed tech, I still haven't brought into that other world either. It just doesn't feel authentic. It doesn't feel good. It doesn't feel equitable. It still feels icky. And at some point, we need to shut that system down and move into this system. Because if we really believe that we have the tools and the tools is for a greater community to succeed academically, we shouldn't have a gatekeeping or a gatekeeper in between us, such as funding, right? Like that should not be it.
Could listen to y'all for hours. I'm going to close us out with a final question. Larry, as a heads up, we'll start with you for this one. We talked about a lot of ideas on the table today, right? From how we should be thinking about technology to the supports that Black leaders need in the education space and so much more. And I'm curious, if you had to think about one thing that is your big aspiration for the future of education that's not getting too much attention now, what would that be and why? Larry, we'll start with you.
Yeah, and I'll keep it quick, man. So for the essence of time, I want education to be fun again. I want us to reimagine, education. Our kids truly being connected to their teachers, anticipating going to school, like it was when not to sound like the old the old guy on the call, but I want to reimagine education, redefine what that looks like. I want us to really flip the whole teacher criterion on its head. Let's reimagine what it looks like to be an educator. What does that training look like? How do we prepare schools and districts and systems with the right barometers to identify certain levels of intelligencies, particularly from Black men, right? I think we're really missing out on great educators and great teachers because we can't recognize certain talents in the form that they come in. People have different walks of life, and people may show up different, but it doesn't mean they lack any less genius or brilliance. And I really want to start rolling our sleeves up and digging deep in regards to what are the barometers by which we measure people that we think are smart and intelligent, and how they show up in our classrooms, and really start to reimagine what are the avenues and pathways to get new educators, a new bloodline of educators and teachers into the K-12 system.
Yes. Making education fun and recognizing lots of different ways to demonstrate your intelligence. Anyone feeling called to go next?
Yeah, I'll add something there, and it's actually along the lines of fun. It's along the lines of love, things that are missing from classrooms and school districts. And what's so interesting is for those of us who have been in the work long enough, I'm bald, I don't know Larry, but we lost our hair in the process, is that as you stay in this work long enough, you realize that the immense amount of red tape, the amount of bureaucracy to not just open a school, but to sell to a school, to bring your solution to a school. You may have the best idea. You may have so many fun, passionate, radical individuals doing the most amazing, dope work for kids that will never make it into an American classroom because of the red tape and the bureaucracy. And so I think my hope for education is to remove that red tape and allow for leaders to say, I know my kids because I'm with them for 9 hours a day. They need X resource. I don't want to wait 9 months for central office to approve this solution for my kids tomorrow.
Freedom. Tiffany or Kimberly? Oh, go ahead, Tiffany.
I think for me, my hope would be more opportunity for intersectional learning and kind of like the project-based style that we were starting to see. It really saddens me when I have a student that's in the 12th grade that does not recognize their skills that were actually present in doing projects, right? Or doing different things like passing an exam or going on a field trip. Everything is so siloed right now in our systems, and our students don't recognize no, like Kimberly, one of the things that gave me chills is your mantra at your school is I can do hard things, because our students can, and sometimes they don't recognize that thing that you did that was difficult in that arena, all you got to do is pivot that same part of you into this arena, and it's the same attributes that you had there can be here, but because everything is so siloed, oh no, I only did that in science and this is different, right? We got to make those kind of sorry y'all with the nerdiness, but those connections in our neurons to be able to fire at the right time when they need it, because our students actually don't understand the complexity of who they are until usually senior year, when it's let's put all of this together. And it's we got to make sure that when we're planning and we're doing curriculum design, when we're thinking about social emotional learning, even when we're thinking about bringing in school counselors and conversations, how can we all be on the same page to make sure that students are aware and reflective of what they've done? So that way, when they need to do it again, it doesn't feel like the first time. And so we know that when it comes to imposter syndrome, in general, research says the number one reason when it's an internalized thing, where they don't feel like they belong somewhere, is because they have never reflected on all the things that they have done. And so we got to pause. We got to build that in our curriculum, right? We got to have them be able to recognize that the strength that you had on the basketball court, we just need that same strength here. It's the same you, right? We don't need another part of you. You don't even need to develop the skill. You just need to let it show up here and give students flexibility on how to make sure that they know they can have it show up, even if it's in a different context. So that would be my hope, because I think, Kimberly, I'm excited for your kids when they get older, because they're going to know this is difficult, but I can do it. And I can handle every single emotion that comes with it, including disappointment and sadness. It will not overtake me. And so oftentimes we like stay away from things because we don't think we can handle it, but we can do hard things. And so I listen, that for me chills. So that's what I hope for the future.
So I love all of that, and thank you, Tiffany. I don't think I can add anything. That I just like am over here like ditto, yes, echo to everything that the three of you just said. And I guess I would just summarize it to say that, like, for someone who works with this generation alpha and these little people who have so many big ideas and so much promise for the world, my hope is that they have that joy and that freedom and that flexibility to truly, that the systems relax so that they can live that out, right? Because what I fear is that, we will nurture these young people who believe that they are every single thing that they are, that they can do anything that their minds can imagine, and that we create space for that. And that when they leave us, someone comes and puts a damper on that. And so my hope is that the systems and the world and the jobs and the organizations, and that we continue to just allow for that curiosity and that boldness to come alive. Because, we say every generation, as we all become the older folks, Larry, we all say, well, back in our day, or this or that. But I truly, as both a mom and an educator, being around young people under the age of 8 every day, it truly is a privilege and an honor to see how their brains connect and how many opportunities they already know how to create for themselves. And so I just, like, my hope is not as much for education, but my hope is for the world. My hope is for those of us who need to retire from government, from systems, from holding all the decision making, that we would retire and make space for these young people who are going to come into it with much more belief about what they can do, with much more evidence that they are brilliant and can do hard things and can have impact.
I'm gonna have all of y'all come off mute and give snaps to each other for this beautiful and brilliant insight today. And a huge thank you to all of you, Kimberly, Tiffany, Jacob, and Larry, for taking the time to share your wisdom with each other, with everyone who's listening again. And huge thank you to everybody who took some time to hear these insights and for joining us. If you'd like to learn more about Camelback, our community, you can go to camelbackventures.org/fellows, see what we are up to. In the meantime, we are wishing you a happy Black History Month and sending gratitude for sharing this space with us today. Bye-bye.
Bye.